Welcome back. Our last guest, Melissa Hiemann, is a trauma therapist and author, and the topic we'll be discussing today is how trauma affects our parenting. Welcome, Melissa.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. So, Melissa, how does trauma affect our parenting?
Yes, so firstly, I'll explain what trauma is. So trauma and in relation to parenting is usually ages 0 to 7, where we have a very strong emotional response where we feel very scared or very stressed out, but we don't have someone safe there with us to help us process that, or we feel like we're trapped and that energy can't move through our body and it gets stuck in our body, and it can cause behaviors, negative thoughts and flashbacks later in life. It can definitely affect our relationship in regards to that we have with our kids, our relationship with parenting, our relationship with another parent, if we have a partner, because we're taught certain ways of how to be nurturing, we're taught certain ways of how to discipline a child, and we've received it in certain ways. And so that can impact what we do with our children, right? So for example, with me, my mum was left at a boarding school when she was 4 years old. And so she didn't have a lot of nurturing there. And so when she came to having me, it was really about, in that generation, the food is on the table, roof over your head, and there wasn't much emotional support. And she would never sit down and play with me. And so for me personally, as a parent, I forgive her and I understand that that's just the way that she was brought up. But then when it came to actually playing with my child, I actually found it very difficult, and that nurturing and playful side didn't come out naturally, and I had to really work on that because I was neglected in that way. So that can be one example. Another example is, say someone is very strict as a parent and they believe that hitting or that kind of discipline is good, even though they might be alcoholics because they have anxiety all the time and they're always worried about getting in trouble. Even as an adult, they're just like, well, that's the way I was parented. This is how I'm going to parent my kids. And that strictness, the child and the parent lose their bond and their connection and trust. And the kid just learns that I only get attention maybe when I'm doing something naughty, and that can really perpetuate the behavior, and that could be generational. Then when that child becomes a parent, they could believe that the discipline in that way is the right thing to do. And then you can go on the other spectrum where a parent is just very carefree, the child is free range and let to do whatever they want to do. There's no structure, there's no guidance. As a parent should be a guide and a safe connection for that child. And then they might feel like a little bit lost, and they don't fit in anywhere, and they're not connecting with anyone. So there's like a real spectrum there of how trauma can affect us and how the way we were parented can affect how we parent our children.
That makes a lot of sense. How do we be aware of our own personal trauma when we're parenting?
So if you're a parent, you might know how triggering parenting can be. So for example, if your child is having a tantrum, right, and maybe growing up you weren't allowed to cry, you were told to shut up if you cried. So when that trauma is trapped in your body, you couldn't process those emotions, and those stress hormones are trapped in your body. Now, when your child is having a tantrum and screaming, it's triggering that part of you that wasn't allowed to express itself, and you want to quickly shut down that child because it's so uncomfortable in your body because that trauma is being triggered by your child. So instead of telling the child to shut up and stop crying, we can become a bit more self-aware and think, this is feeling very uncomfortable for me, and just getting curious about that and being there for your child and being really present rather than being really stuck in how you're feeling and perpetuating that generational trauma that could happen if generation after generation they were told, like, shut up, don't cry. So parenting really starts before we become a parent. I know that it starts way back to the partner that you choose, and the partner that you choose is going to have such a significant impact on your nervous system, on your stress levels, on how peaceful you feel, and how conducive that is to having a really nurturing and safe space to bring a child into. So it really starts with am I attracting the right partner or going for the right partners that are conducive to having a really trauma-aware, conscious parenting environment, a peaceful environment to bring a child into. And then as when you become pregnant, and then at about 3 or 4 months old in the womb, the nervous system of the baby and the child is already scanning the mother's nervous system and the environment to see what they're going to come out into. And trauma can already start there. So even for myself, when I was in the womb, I would have been scanning and seeing, what is my father like? What is the household like? What am I coming into? Oh, my mum feels very alone and unsupported, and I could take that trauma on while I'm growing in her belly. So that's when it can start. And then ages 0 to 7, a child's body, even if they don't consciously remember, remembers every single thing. So when you let your baby cry it out, when you hit a toddler, when these things happen, when a child is watching domestic violence or watching fighting, they're literally absorbing every single thing that is going on and what happens to them or what doesn't happen to them when they're not protected and abuse happens. And that's their blueprint for how they are going to be as an adult. And most of our personality is created ages 0 to 7. So the more traumas that there are, and there's a study called the ACE study where if there's violence in the house, alcoholism, abuse, neglect, the more likely someone is to have obesity issues or health issues, addictions, and issues in their own relationship.
What advice would you have for parents out there to repair their own relationships with their children?
Yeah, so when we explain all of this information, they become aware it can bring up a lot of guilt and shame of perhaps how we've caused our children trauma. But the great news is there's neuroplasticity, which means that we can heal our relationship with our children. You know, we can say sorry to our children, even if we thought we were doing the best that we could, which we definitely were. And we can start to repair that bond that we have by creating positive events, creating positive memories, holding space for our children's emotions, holding space for our own emotions firstly, so we can hold space for others. So we can start to break the generational cycles and the perpetuating traumas that are getting passed down in our DNA, in our environment, in our families. It's never too late. And the first step is, working with someone yourself and releasing that guilt, that shame, and healing your traumas, and you will naturally evolve and be able to heal that relationship with your child.
Thanks, Melissa. That's such valuable information. If you'd like to know more about Melissa Hiemann and how trauma shows up in our parenting, go to her webpage on our website, healthwellbeingandlifestyle.com.au. And that's all for us for today. We'll say bye-bye until next time.